So without further ado, let me introduce our guest. As many of you know, Tom Buntzen is a research geologist as well as an avid mining historian. He graduated with both a BS and an MS degree in geology from the University of Alaska Fairbanks. After retiring as Senior Economic Geologist for the State Division of Geological and Geophysical Survey, Tom formed Pacific Rim Geological Consulting Incorporated. Tom and his staff have worked throughout Alaska, the Yukon, and the Russian Far East on a wide-ranging geological projects. Tom has been active in the Alaska Miners Association and a founder, along with others, of the Alaska Mining Hall of Fame Foundation, which honors Alaska's mining pioneers. Please welcome Tom Buntzen. Now, Tom, you were born in Fargo, North Dakota. Yes. They moved it.
That's okay.
You got to watch them on those maps, you know.
Yes.
Anyway, you were one of four kids. Where are you in the birth order?
Well, my brother Robert is first. I'm second. Cheryl is third, and Susie was fourth.
Okay. Now, you said both your parents came from farming backgrounds, but
Yes.
your dad was an engineer. What kind of
Well,
engineer?
Dad was, of course, they were both products of the Great Depression. And Dad grew up in a farm town called Kindred, North Dakota. And my mother grew up in a farm town called Wolverton, Minnesota, in the general Fargo-Moorhead area. And so he grew up in a farm. They both grew up as farming kids, really, but he went to World War II with the U.S. Navy, was aboard a destroyer in the Pacific, I think in the Battle of Okinawa and places, but he got really interested in electronics. And so when he came back, he went through a bachelor's degree and got a electrical engineering degree at the North Dakota State University. And that got him going. So because of his military background, as I was growing up as a little kid, we went to very many places because he was working for naval contract things, Norfolk, Virginia, Libertyville, Illinois, but finally settling in Alamogordo, New Mexico, where he worked at White Sands Proving Grounds in Holloman Air Force Base, and I mentioned that to you. And before we came to Alaska, that was a wonderful place for a little kid like myself to grow up. New Mexico was just, the New Mexico desert was cool, and little kids catching lizards and horny toads and everything else all over the place. And right behind Alamogordo, by the way, this is something, there was a mountain of Permian limestone, which is completely fossiliferous. And that's when I first became interested in rocks.
Wow.
Just, yeah.
Yeah. Now, do you think because of your dad's engineering background, that led you into your eventual?
Oh, possibly, although Dad was, he just wanted his kids to be successful. He wasn't overly specific about going to college. My brother did end up being a doctor. He was in the first WWAMI program here.
No kidding.
And he became an infectious disease expert in Anchorage, Alaska. He just recently retired. Cheryl became a CPA, a public accountant here in town. And Susie was a hospital career until she passed away a number of years ago.
Mm-hmm. So the family came up here in 1960?
1960. And they came up because he got a really good job offer from RCA to work on the ballistic missile early warning system, BMUS, at Clare, Alaska.
Wow.
And he was trained in New Jersey to do that job. It was kind of, that was a time of competition between the Soviet Union and the United States about missile technology and this and that. So they put together Clare pretty fast. And so he came up for that, and we stayed. Our first year here was in Fairbanks. I went to University Park Elementary School. My teacher was Mrs. Broderick, I remember that, 5th grade. Every afternoon she would read Anne and Green Gables to us. I remember that. I talked to a number of
That
people
stuck
around
with
town.
ya.
One of the Binkleys remembered it, Skip Binkley, and one of the Sikoras. We were all in the same class. You know, these people, they all remember the same thing, Anne
Yeah.
of Green Gables. Anyways, but we moved out to Anderson, and where I spent 4 memorable years.
Is it true you were the first newsboy there?
I was the first newspaper boy for the Fairbanks Daily News Miner in Anderson, Alaska. So,
How was it collecting from the subscribers?
well, it was really interesting. There was lots of old timers in town. They weren't all just immigrants for clear. Art Anderson was there. He's still alive and well. And Hugh Neff, ran the power plant. And when I would go around collect for the paper, all these old timers would always pay in silver dollars.
Huh.
I still have about half those silver dollars.
They've appreciated
that
somewhat.
That was the way Alaska, right at the verge, right after statehood, they were paying everything in silver dollars. So.
Yeah. So you were there 4 years, but then your mom's health took a turn.
She got terminally ill, and we had to go back south. We ended up spending a couple years in Colorado Springs, Colorado for her treatment. I really liked Colorado Springs at that. You know, it was really no bigger than Fairbanks is today. It was a nice place, nice people. She got good care, but she didn't make it, so we all came back to Alaska.
That can be pretty traumatic, I imagine. How did it affect the family?
Oh, it was pretty rough. My dad had never taken care of 4 kids before because she was the mother, and she was the person that took care of those kids. So it was a rough transition for him. I went down to a ranch in New Mexico for a while, and that was fun and interesting. And other people, and then we all got back together. Mm-hmm. And then he wanted to. The consensus was, let's go back to Alaska. Although Colorado was nice, but let's go back and he got a job at Gilmore Creek Tracking Station.
Oh, okay.
And we got here just in time for the 1967 flood.
Timing is everything.
Literally, like within a week.
Okay, yeah. I got to hear the memory from that.
Oh, well, the memory was that we had a camper mounted on a Chevy pickup truck, and we wake up in the morning at 3 a.m. in the morning, and there's about a foot of water down. We were on College Road near a trailer court, and we drove to the beach, which was at the University of Alaska where the stairs were. That's where the beach was. And I must say this, that I remember vividly, the University of Alaska took phenomenally good care of thousands of people. I don't know how they did it. But they were way over max, but they fed everybody, and it was a crisis time. Many of you probably remember it, but eventually the water subsided and people went back home. That's kind of what happened. Yeah. They should have gotten an award for the way they treated people. I mean, they weren't set up for that, but they immediately jumped into it, and everybody got taken care of. Mm-hmm. That's very rarely remembered, and it should be thought about a little bit. Yeah.
So you were in high school at the time?
I finished my high school career at Lathrop High School, class of '68. I have gone to 2 or 3 other reunions. It's always fun. And
yeah.
We mentioned Steve Frank and others over the years, And then decided to enroll at the University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Now, so your dad, you say, wanted you all to be successful. So college was a given. You were expected to go to college. Did you ever think?
I don't know. I just wanted to do something scientific. I was actually started off as a biology major.
No kidding.
Yeah. I wanted to be a fisheries biologist, but what changed my mind was getting field work in the summers both with private companies and the Department of Natural Resources, and going out in the field and living in tents and looking at rocks, and that changed everything. I could grab onto that.
Okay.
So that's what changed everything, really.
So you go into geology. Who was in the department then, and what was?
Well,
it
you know,
like?
there was a lot of really, I mean, this is always a strong earth science school. I mean, Troy Payway had just left. He was a famous superficial geologist. He later became the department chair at Arizona State University in Tempe. Robert Forbes was the chair at the time. He was a famous petrologist. But Dan Hawkins, great geochemist, great teacher. When he wasn't singing in Fairbanks Light Opera Theater performances, which he really was.
Hey, priorities, okay?
He really was a very talented performer, he really was. But you know, Donald Greibeck, who was a mentor in a way, you know, he's what really got me into economic geology. He was a very good economic geologist and a very good lecturer, and I kind of hooked right up onto it. There was Roger Slatt was there, but he was on the engineering side. He later became the department chair of geology at Colorado School of Mines.
Hmm.
So, I mean, there was talent here, and it went elsewhere, and they continued their education. There was a lot of talent, actually.
I often hear from students, particularly at that period, that one of the great things about attending UAF was that you had access to professors. It was personal, and the class size allowed you to have a sort of more human experience. Is that right?
That's right. And I mentioned paleontology, Dick Allison, Carol Allison. They were world-class paleontologists. I mean, Carol was an expert, a world expert on Precambrian fossils. I mean, she was noted for that. So they had a high level, and then they were small classes, and so you could interact. Not that you're not getting great education now. I'm just saying that's what I went through.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
well, help me here. What exactly is an economic geologist?
Well, it's an economic, or let's say economic geology is the study of materials in the earth crust, minerals, industrial minerals, energy minerals, and they would include precious metals like gold, silver, and platinum, group elements, base metals like copper, lead, zinc, nickel, strategic and critical minerals like cobalt or rare earth elements or niobium, things like that, or also industrial minerals like limestone, construction materials, zeolites, you know, other things that are not metallic but are still used by society. And so an economic geologist studies these things and tries to interpret how they formed, when they formed, what the relative size is, how to classify them into a geologic model that fits. And doing so, we actually, economic geologists use geophysics, geochemistry, structural geology, aerial photography, examination of superficial geology. We use a lot of different techniques to complete those studies, whether they're for a private company or a public entity like a geological survey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, I just get a headache thinking about how much land there is, and what are some of the tools for you to identify what's underneath the overburden or what's there, Tom? Because I don't even know.
No, it's a good question, and it's over a century of time, a lot of information has been collected in Alaska. And a good geological map that helps you identify rock units that may be metalliferous, surface geochemical studies by federal and state agencies for soils and rock and stream sediments, geophysical surveys for magnetics and gravity and conductivity surveys, which can help you find mineral deposits. And that's all in the A lot of it's digitized. It's managed by a number of different agencies. The state survey, the Geological Survey, has probably their best website, and you access that information when you search for minerals.
Well,
And there's a lot of good information out there to access.
I know you go out in the field quite a bit, and I remember an article by Ned Roselle sometime back where you found possibly the oldest rock in Alaska.
We were out, and this was a cooperative work with the United States Geological Survey, myself and Marty Miller, who ran the federal side, and we were in the Iditarod Quad. And it was really, we got there in a helicopter, remote at flat, and our first traverse, we just flew west and landed on a hilltop, and there was rocks that shouldn't have been there. They were high-ranked metamorphic rocks. They are not on the map. They're not supposed to be there. And we later went through age dating technologies, and we determined that those rocks were 2.2 billion years old, and even factored some neodymium samarium survey work that suggests they might be as old as 2.5 billion years old. That's Archean, and they are by far the oldest rocks in Alaska.
Wow.
But it was just a complete,
fluke.
fate.
Yeah, yeah. That's amazing.
We had no idea they would be there.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, so between your bachelor's and then your master's degrees, you went down to New Zealand.
Yes.
And tell me, what was it like and what drew you there?
Well, New Zealand's a wonderful country. I mean, there's a North Island and a South Island. And what I did, instead of just as a tourist, I went down there and worked. For a while, I got a visa to allow me to work. And I worked as an assistant for the New Zealand Geological Survey for a couple months. And I worked for a small mining company for a few weeks looking at limestone, but mostly I picked apples. And that was the hardest job I've ever had in my life. We had to pick 85 bushels a day or they would fire you. And you have to pick them in such a way that you're not bruising them, so you got to bring them down these trees, and you're up on ladders that are 20 feet high, and you bring them down very, very lightly and get those bushels off to where they sort them and sell them and export. Actually, it's all export product. See, if they're damaged, they won't take them. And they have these inspectors. They take a hard look at it. So that was a unique experience. I liked New Zealand. It was an agricultural country at that time. Now, I've been told it's quite different now. I don't know. It's changed.
Did you think about staying? Did you like it?
Well, I did. I liked it so much, especially the South Island. I made lots of friends, and I wanted to go to school at Otago at University in Dunedin. But I had visa problems. If you think that we talk about this issue of immigration and borders and stuff, but I can tell you what, if you extend beyond your visa, they'll come after you in New Zealand. I mean, they just will. There was a bust in a hostel. I stayed at night. The New Zealand immigration people busted it and busted a whole bunch of people where their visas had expired. Wow. And deported them. Wow. I mean, they weren't kidding.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it's changed. Maybe it's a long time ago. So they had a policy then, and they really felt that they wanted a certain population size, and they didn't want it to be any larger than that. They had a model. And really, when you look at it, the New Zealand population has not increased a lot the last 40, 50 years. They control it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you came back, you get your master's degree.
Yeah.
And so how did you come to work for the state?
Well, when I was doing my undergraduate work, some of the work I did, I got winter work and summer work with the state survey. And I got to know them. And when I got back, of course, I had a degree. And that was one of the factors of not returning to New Zealand. I was offered a job as a professional geologist. And I couldn't turn it down.
Sure.
Just with a bachelor's degree. Mostly they don't hire unless you got at least a master's. And I decided to take it. And I had bought property in Goldstream Valley, and I thought, well, let's see how this works.
Yeah.
So that's what I did.
Yeah. Well, you were 25 years in the
Yeah.
as economic geologist. You must have seen your profession change over time. What stands out from your period there?
Well, I worked for the state survey for 25 full years, and it was the greatest job I've ever had. I really liked it. I always would think very fondly of the agency, but I wanted to consult because I just wanted to see another side of things and how the private sector actually worked. And I also wanted to travel more. And as a result of my private work, I've worked in not only the Russian Federation, but I've worked in Sweden, in Finland, and I've worked in other international jurisdictions.
Sure.
And so I just wanted that opportunity. And the last 2 years of my career here, I've worked in Greenland, the last 2 years here, and so it gives me the opportunity to mess around. But what has changed? Well, what has changed is when I started my career, there were no large metal mines going. It was just the old historic placer mines and a coal mine at Usabelli and some sand and gravel operations and some small ones. What's changed is that there's a larger industry now with the Red Dog zinc mine, the world's largest producer of zinc, and the Greens Creek mine near Juneau, a significant producer of zinc and silver and other metals, and of course Fort Knox and Pogo. So that's changed.
That's changed.
Yeah.
So a quick question before we get to Russia and your work there. Just terminology. Whenever I hear geologists talk about the history of the formation of Alaska, they use this term, and I would never associate it with plate tectonics. It's called rafting. Would you explain how it got that term?
Well, plate tectonics it's still a theory, but I think most people accept it as almost a law. But it's really the idea that we have an active Earth, accretionary tectonics, with the upper lithosphere moving along the mantle, basically, which is composed largely of basalt and ultramafic rocks, and originating in rifts in the ocean, spreading centers, and then subduction underneath continental crust, like North America or Alaska or anywhere else. And so, that's pretty much the going model ever since. When we term rafting, we're talking about fragments of rock, which we call tectonic terrains, that get caught up in this. And so a lot of Alaska is built with accretionary sedimentary basements and granitic terrains and volcanic arcs that have been slapped onto the western margin of North America. Some of these rafts, if you will, did not originate in North America because of the active nature of the globe. There's an island in southeast Alaska, Prince of Wales Island, part of Admiralty Island, are composed of rocks, for example, that some people think came from Australia. Wow. And were rafted all the way across the Pacific Ocean and slapped along the side of Alaska. And there's rock sections in western Alaska, near Farewell, in the south of McGrath, that contain fossils. They are not from North America. They're from Czechoslovakia. They're from places in Eastern Europe. There's no way you can make them part of North America. How'd they get there? Well, they got there through this rafting concept and slapped onto Alaska through massive tectonic dislocations.
Slow rafting, though.
Yeah. Slow rafting.
Yeah, millions
but
and millions.
But if you have 100 million years to do it, you can get it all the way across the Pacific. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to get to Russia here in a second, but first, did you, considering you're a mining historian and your work, did you ever want to be a miner yourself?
That's a good question. When I've visited many small gold miners through my career, and it's a wonderful way of life. But in order to do that, you have to have a really good mechanic on hand. because, yeah, you might know as a geologist how that mineral deposit formed, that placer deposit, or maybe a way to search for more. But if you're going to be mining, you have to have on your crew, or maybe the person leading the crew is someone that can take apart a Caterpillar tractor or get involved in the complexities of heavy equipment. And you just, that has to be part of it.
Yeah.
And I don't have those talents. So, I mean, maybe before I pass away or something, I run into some great mechanic that yeah, I might sign up, be part of that company, but I haven't done it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, in 1989, you were the state of Alaska's representative in an international geologic exchange among Canada, Alaska, and the Russian Far East. But I understand your history with Russia goes back a few years earlier. How did that come about?
Well, I was always interested in Russian history and Russian art, and I could say that. And also Russian geology. After all, they're our neighbors, basically. And so in 1984, they had the International Geological Congress in Moscow. And I decided, and I had taken 2 years of Russian here at the University of Alaska.
Oh.
And so I was functional, not literate, but functional. I understood it well enough to travel. So I went to Moscow and spent almost a month there because it was a huge meeting and they had field trips all over the place. One field trip I took to was the Kola Deep Drill Hole. It still is the deepest hole ever drilled by man. Goes down about 8 miles.
Wow.
And near Murmansk, way up north. And it was fascinating to see it. And all sorts of surprises came out of that. They found water at the bottom of the hole. Can you believe that? I mean, 8 miles down. They found, they thought they were going to have the mole discontinuity, which means the basalt mantle material I talked about earlier. They didn't hit that. They had metamorphic rocks. So they came up with complete surprises about what the geology is, which is why sometimes academic science is worth pursuing, I think.
Yeah.
But then I took a trip to Soviet Georgia, and that was really a fun trip. I looked at some mineral deposits near Tbilisi. Wonderful country and very friendly people. And, but it was the Soviet Union. And so it was a challenge to get through it all, but it was very memorable. It was something I really got ingratiated with, I guess. Yeah.
Did it ever, was there ever issues that prevented that cooperation between countries?
Well, they just wanted to, in '84, the Russian or Soviet scientific community wanted to see Americans there. And we got treated pretty well,
Okay.
I thought. It was the Soviet Union. It was a police state, so to speak. It was pretty tough. I mean, there was all of the Western people that went over there. I think they had people tagging them around, you know. But it didn't prevent me from enjoying myself. The next time was 1989. Remember when this exchange began, it was still the Soviet Union. And it was strictly in the Russian Far East. And to say it's memorable, I will never forget it. We were the first Western geologist, frankly, to visit an old gulag camp. A bad one, actually, that had a high mortality rate, but they weren't afraid to talk about it. We were the first professionals, I think, to get down to Vladivostok. And we were the first professionals to get to Petropavlovsk-Kamchatsky, because these are all closed because they were military sites. And so to let us in, it was fascinating. They had a geology meeting in Khabarovsk on the Amur River, which is a wonderful city, by the way. And they were more westernized because Intourist had started tourism in that part of the neck of the woods about 30 years earlier. So they were used to Westerners. And so we had Michael Halbooty, the old tycoon here that was active in Alaska during, the Swanson River oil field and all that. He was there. He actually organized the meeting. And he was still alive. He was 90 years old, I think. But he was there, and he wanted to make it a success. And I think those were times of great change for the Soviet Union, because just 2 years later they were no longer the Soviet Union. It was a new time for them.
I remember when the curtain came
Yeah.
down and there was more exchange, but also it was a bit chaotic. And I remember doing a science story about scientists really deeply concerned that the records and data that had been compiled all during the Soviet Union was at risk of either decaying or,
Yeah.
and there was efforts to try to rescue that.
And they are, and of course, Alaska had a data at-risk program put on by the late Donald Drybeck of the U.S. Geological Survey, one of my mentors. Ted Stevens put a lot of money into this, so they were rescuing data here, just for the same reasons. It gets
Right.
lost. It's pre-digital age, you know. Yes, they were having problems there too. A lot of the Soviet Union, for better or worse, put a lot of emphasis on geologic mapping, an awful lot. And they mapped that huge country at pretty good scale. But just because of the force of what they thought it was important to do that. But they were in danger of losing that material themselves. And so and even recently, a couple of years ago, I was still talking to the Kamchatka Geological Survey, their state geologists, in effect. They had a program to try to rescue information. So it's an ongoing thing.
You know, I think with the Russian invasion of Ukraine and whatnot, and the tensions international, do events like that, political events like that, compromise the relationships that you have professionally with colleagues?
Yes, of course it does.
Yeah.
And I still have relationships. I have published papers with Russian scientists. I intend to do that as much as I can in the future, especially as I have more time to do that. But yes, I mean, the volume of emails has dropped dramatically. And think about this, you don't want to get them in trouble, and maybe they don't want to get you in trouble because there's surveillance on both sides. And so, yeah, I'm not happy about all this stuff, and I just hope that it kind of eventually heads back in a different direction. But that's the reality right now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, let me then kind of talk about when you enter the private sector. You obviously have a lot of connections and whatnot. Did it bring you, you said you had more freedom to travel, you had more opportunities. Talk about that transition, Tom.
Well, when you set up a consulting, firstly, I wasn't sure it was going to work. I mean, I went from a academic, for 25 years I worked for the state of Alaska, and so going private, there was a learning curve, and I think it took about 3 years for me to learn how to do it.
What was the biggest challenge, would you say?
Well, just trying to set up the office, trying to establish clienteles and relationships, trying to manage the budget of a private company or a consulting firm. And it's the nature of consulting and exploration geology is it's very erratic and goes up and down a lot. So you have to, and most importantly, you have to establish the right relationships. I sort of got lucky and got some good relationships going and survived. Some people don't.
Well, now,
Yeah.
where you talked about Scandinavian countries. What are some memorable?
Well, I worked in South Africa for a while, and that was memorable. I got an Oppenheimer grant from a small one, and I teamed up with David Stone, one of my professors here. The late David Stone, he passed away a couple of years ago, but so I spent some time in Grahamstown and Johannesburg and Cape Town, and then later when I went overseas, I had these Russian connections, but I didn't really reactivate them for several years. So I was in Scandinavia, working up in northern Sweden on the Kiruna iron deposits, and some similar deposits in northern Finland, and things like that. So but most of my work's here in Alaska. I mean, just because that's where the bread and butter was, so to speak. That's where the most bigger contracts and stability was. But beginning in 2002, I began to do more work in Khabarovsk region, but especially Kamchatka. So I did a number of projects for both Western companies and Russian companies.
Oh.
And so both, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So travel, was that an issue at that point, going to
Well, yeah, I was
Russian
always
Far
kind
East?
of, you had to go through the consulates, and most of my visas went through Seattle. They did a good job. But it was more difficult to travel now, and it's becoming, actually, the irony of, and the tragedy really, because now we have such bad relations, it's becoming easier to travel in Russia. You can get over there without a visa for extended periods of time, or you could, as of 2021. I think now it's going to be more difficult. But you know, it's actually, they want to open up, they wanted to open up more, and they wanted to develop their tourist industry too, which they have very successfully. And so the irony is it was getting easier, but now I'm not sure. I have to rethink about everything now to see how, because I haven't been there since 2018. So,
You know, one question I meant to ask you is often technology changes for many professionals, how they go about. With all the remote sensing capabilities of satellites and whatnot, and the extension, does that change what an economic geologist does?
sure, it changes I mean, some of the newer, of course, got all these advanced geophysical surveys that are very helpful, by the way. But also, we have new technologies like XRF, semi-quantitative analyses. You can literally shoot a gun on a rock and come up with the 40 elements about what's in that rock.
Whew.
And I've used that extensively in Greenland, and also here in Alaska. It's a real bombshell, really. And there's other technologies like that that you can utilize that modernize everything. There's hyperspectral analyses that help you quickly identify alteration in rocks, and alteration patterns are key to understanding how the ore body formed. And so there's a lot. Some of these new technologies are very exciting.
Yeah.
And I think they will result in discoveries of new deposits here in Alaska. I really believe it'll happen too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk to you more about your historian side of your career. You served as president of the Alaska Miners Association and direct the local branch. So tell me about that group and what its mission is.
The Alaska Miners Association has a very simple, let me read this if I get it right here. It's to advocate and promote responsible mineral development in Alaska, and that is their statement. So what does that encompass? Working with regulatory functions and agencies to ensure that the regulations are reasonable, working with the state of Alaska in acquisition of lands for development, working with the federal government to do what they can to alleviate any issues with them, working with the Alaska Department of Environmental Conservation or the US EPA about making sure that mineral developments are sound and technically, environmentally acceptable. One of the things when I was statewide president, it's interesting you bring this up because this building right here, the school was undergoing a big reorganization. And so I was up here, and the executive director, because I was statewide president, actually he did everything, but he always told me I was the boss as president. So I met with Marshall Lind and President Hamilton about how this would go and what kind of naming. And I'm not saying I had directly had something to do with this, but it's the School of Engineering and Mines. And I think especially Marshall Lind saw that as an important thing to keep. The heritage having the old school of mines here and their importance with the early dredging activities of the FE company and all the fine engineering groups that they put together. And so I did that. I also, the AMA wasn't annually assessing what it really was, and so I helped push this idea of doing economic surveys every year through a private contractor, the McDowell Group, to see what the economic activities and what their impacts were to the people of Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, Tom, a friend of mine, he was joking, of
Yeah.
course, but he wanted me to ask you, why should we care about mining? Now, he knows the importance of mining,
Okay.
but I think sometimes people don't even think about mining unless there's some controversial prospect
Yeah.
or development in play.
And that's, I was reading you sent me a few questions. That was going to be a tough one to answer, because the importance of mining is that we all use mineral materials. Critical and strategic values, especially in more restricted economic infrastructure worldwide now. The locations and production of rare earth elements and niobium and graphite and zinc, it's becoming more strategic because there's blockades of their use now, and so they're going to be important to get. Zinc is a critical metal now. It's just classified as by the U.S. Geological Survey, and we're a big producer of zinc. We also produce germanium and indium and gallium as byproducts at Red Dog, and they're used in that cell phone that people might have here, or in computer
That they put on
technologies.
silent mode, right?
Yeah.
Are we
Yeah.
on the page here?
I don't have it here because I
Yeah,
turned mine
yeah.
off. But anyways, the one positive thing I see because of these issues, for the first time, I've seen people the general public are asking questions about this. Where before the argument about mining was always economic, good jobs, revenues, et cetera, versus we don't want it, it's not enough for us, or it causes too much environmental damage. I think that what I see now is people are curious about what metals are actually used for, and minerals. And I would like to think that they keep asking those questions. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and you were also instrumental, a founder of the Alaska Mining Hall of Fame Foundation.
Yeah.
And I want to ask about that also because when we talk about mining in Alaska, you pointed out there's still a lot of mom and pop, so-called mom and pop operations, and there's a rich history associated in Alaska, and Fairbanks wouldn't exist without mining.
Well, we formed an Alaska Mining Hall of Fame exactly 25 years ago. And the founders were Earl Beislein, Mary Nordale, myself, Chuck Hawley, and then some other people that added on, Carl Hahnemann, local guy in town here, and others. But we wanted to honor people that made a difference in the mining industry. And it didn't have to be just miners or geologists, but engineers, prospectors, believe it or not, lawyers. You have to have a good lawyer to have a mine. Probably can't afford to operate without one. But just people involved in the mining industry. So
I think, hold on a second, I think you're...
let me see here.
There you go, you're back.
Am I back? Okay.
Yeah.
So we started to induct people. The first people we inducted were extremely well known. Clarence Berry, Felix Pedro, John Minnock, a really important character to mining, but also to Athabascan history. I mean, there's a long story there about his involvement as eventually leading to thinking of natives as citizens. Before 1920 or so, they weren't U.S. citizens. That was kind of a sad legacy, really. But the fact that he was an accepted miner because they accepted his claim that implied he was a citizen. And that went into the court decision. Anyways, we put those But later on, it wasn't hard, the first 20 or 30, to easily put them into the organization. But then as we began to do more research, we realized there's lots of people that were important. And we have inducted 130 people into the Mining Hall of Fame.
Wow.
I'm not saying it will be limitless, but there's a lot more to put in. And we induct people all the way from the Russian-American period. Peter Doroshin, the first geologist that worked in Alaska, a Russian, and the first guy to find commercial quantities of gold, all the way to modern people like Riz Bigelow and Chuck Hawley and others that have passed away recently, but are really responsible for a lot of the more modern mines that we see today. They were on the ground floor of all of them. So, and everybody in between. And men and women, there's a number of women that have been inducted, indigenous people, native peoples, a lot of immigrants. Alaska is an immigrant area when you start to look at where these people came from. The Olson brothers at Good News Bay, biggest platinum mine in the United States for 50 years, were Swedish immigrants. They came from Sweden. And many of the miners, like the Rosanders and the Utilas and stuff in southwest Alaska, which I suspect you two knew them, and they're from Finland. And then the Balkans are loaded up, Stepovich, Miskovich, they're Croatians, Montenegrins, and lots of immigrants that came here in search of gold. And of course, there were also American citizens, but it's been a real mix of people that have partaken in the Alaska mineral story. So, and that's what, and sometimes you don't even know it until you start doing the research on these people and you realize who they were.
Yeah, I was going to ask, we were talking about rescuing the data, but
Yeah.
as a historian, are the records still available?
Yeah, and that's a really good point. See, yeah, there are, but it's hard to get a hold of them, and we feel that we're actually rescuing people from obscurity in a sense, important people, but we have to dig pretty hard to find the information that's, in another generation or two, it'll be a lot harder to find the information needed to induct these people. Our latest inductee, Alward, is Bridget Alward, is from Ireland. She mined in the 40 Mile. Her and her husband, Edward, they hit it rich. They got a lot of gold, and eventually she went back to Ireland and established educational foundations using that money she got from Napoleon Creek in the 40 Mile district. And the Irish know this, and they celebrate her every year, and we had no idea this was going on, but then we connected with them, and they actually, during our induction ceremony, it was conducted from Ireland, and we just sat in and listened to it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
But all these great stories,
Yeah.
how do you get to them? I mean, are there company records that follow?
Yeah, newspapers, historical accounts, a lot of stuff in the old Territorial Department of Mines records that are pretty obscure. A lot of the most valuable stuff, old timers like the Miskovich family acquiring information for 70 or 80 years out at flat and giving them to us. And Earl Beislein had enormous numbers. He was obviously someone that was quite interested in all this. And so he had lots of records that we could look at. And so we did.
A guy like Wendell Berry, who celebrates the family farmer and the small, and the importance of that for our national history, would you say there's a similar, and its disappearance on the American landscape, do you think there's a similar dwindling of these small operations? Or are they still robust and
going? In Alaska here, because of the high prices of gold and some other commodities, there's still a small-scale gold mining industry sector. Up in the Circle Mining District, up at the head of the end of the Steese Highway, I think there's like 25 or 26 mining operations now, up from 0 20 years ago. And so they've come back. And so hopefully that they will be able to continue to operate. But remember something, it's an evolutionary process. They have to conform with water quality regulations, very strict. They'll get shut down or fined, or if they don't, they have to reclaim land, even if it's private land. And so that there's a different ball game going than it was 30 or 40 years ago, but it's still working. I think that they can handle it. And are they as big as they were? No, but they're still a component of the industry.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of personal things I want to ask you about. Your wife and daughter are both really fine artists, and they collaborate together. So, engineer, mining engineer, artist, any of their sensibilities or rub off on you?
That's probably the toughest question to answer. I mean, just Fran and Sarah get out in the field a lot, and Fran's mentor was Bill Berry. I mean, that's just how he operated. Kind of like, getting out and actually sketching moose or this and that, and be coming up with realistic depictions. I think that Bill Berry probably should be given credit for drawing the first accurate moose, because some of them didn't look quite right. And she always, I don't want to speak for her, but she's followed that, and my daughter has followed that too.
Yeah.
And so with a connection to me, well, I like to get out and in the field, and they like to get out in the field and collect information. I guess maybe I'll leave it at that. That's about as best I can do.
So you don't go out and sketch rock outcroppings or anything like that, right?
When I was in Greenland, I took lots of photographs of flowers, and I gave them to Sarah, and she identified every one of them.
There you go.
Yeah. And by the way, their flowers are pretty similar to ours. It's not a big surprise, but yeah.
And finally, a former friend and colleague, John McWhorter, I understand was a hunting partner with you, and you have a tradition of going out and... Well,
we have a tradition. The biggest tradition really is on the Rex Trail with the family, to a couple of generations that go back to literally the 1960s. And we still do that. That's where the one connection I have in town here, Jim Sampson, the former mayor, he also kind of got out there a lot and did moose hunting. So every time I talked to him, he would always talk about moose hunting stories. But for John McWhorter, I have a cabin on the Johnson River, and we hunted with a garden cart for years. It was crazy, dragging out moose down the river with garden carts because it's a walking area only. It actually works when you're young, but John went with us in one, and I simply say that John McWhorter, the great journalist of KUAC, was a natural hunter. He was in extremely good shape, and he harvested a really fine big bull moose, called it in, big bull, and took a long time to get in, but then we processed it and hiked it out, and it was really tough work, but like I say, he was in such great shape that it wasn't hard.
Well, next time I talk to him, I'll remind him of that.
Yeah, do that.
Yeah.
I'd like to, if you ever talk, I haven't seen him in years.
Well, about this time every evening, we open it up to questions from the audience. And whoa, a hand right there. Don?
Well, I think you can't underestimate at all the importance that Tom's talking about there, about the relationships. The relationships not just between scientists, can be between scientists certainly, but even ordinary citizens, the relationships that were built up between Yakutsk and Fairbanks and the Sister City program, for things like agriculture, the Ukrainian war, or call it the Russian war. One attacks another, and now the attacker is being attacked and has so far been able to avoid that. And you have to speak very carefully about this because we have a Ukrainian population in Alaska, and we have many Russians who are professors at the University of Alaska. And people are always watching other
So, Don, are you asking about,
Okay, is it a question? Yeah, I guess the question is, how is it that you really recognize so intimately and obviously the necessity to not seem a spy when you're in Russia?
so the question is, how were you not labeled a spy when you worked with the former Soviets?
I'm not sure how to answer that. It's just that most of the Russians I've dealt with are just normal people and great
So you
scientists.
never ordered a martini shaken, not stirred, right?
No. By the way, most of it has been geological work. I go over there for business. But the last couple times, one time I went over and hunted sheep in Koryak Highlands. There's a lot of mountain sheep in Kamchatka, an awful lot, and they have been hunted by professional hunters here in the United States and globally, really. It was a great hunt. Got to know my guides were native guys. They were great guides, and we hunted on horseback. And so I've done that. And then another time I was invited to come over by the Russian Geographical Society in St. Petersburg, and I gave a little talk there, but we did a lot of research on the Russian America Company, and that was great. I mean, so that wasn't geology, but that was just fun. And so I don't know, I've never had problems traveling. I mean, I just never have. Here's something that's important though, when you're doing hunting or something, it's a bureaucracy, and there's a lot of paperwork. And I always tell people, you follow the rules, and if you don't, you might get in trouble. So you have to make sure that every form is filled out and that you have them there. But I've never had a problem. And 33 trips I've taken over there, so
Wow.
I never had a problem. I'm not saying that you can't or won't, or in different situations. And right now, of course, it's all kind of shut down for a while. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah. Any other questions? Mary?
We live in Goldstream,
Yeah.
and I sometimes wonder about the mining activity in the past and whether there's going to be any in the future. In particular, I think about, I think it was a mine that Don May had, the one,
Don May had a large placer gold mine in Lower Goldstream coming out of Sheep Creek.
Yeah.
And that was very large, and he took out a lot of gold out of there. And a large crew did a really excellent job. And of course, they created a big lake system there that is full of fish, frankly. But anyways, but I think that in terms of placer potential, that has been mined out, I think. Now there's cycles of hard rock mineral exploration that have occurred in the Fairbanks district literally since it started. And now because of the high prices of gold, and they're starting to look again at certain areas that were, all these areas they're looking at are historic areas that have had either past production or past exploration. So they're not really going into new areas, they're just looking at some of these older areas. Like Treasure Creek on the north side, that's being looked at. Of course, Esther Dome, which has been controversial over the years, and other places. I mean, so we're going through this cycle of looking again to see what might come out of the ground.
what is the price of gold now?
It's about $1,950 an ounce. Yeah.
A brief question, Tom, but important. With your knowledge, can you discuss briefly critical minerals in the United States and Alaska, and what our hopes are for some important actions in Alaska?
So
That's a good-
critical
Critical,
minerals.
what are they in Alaska?
Yes.
Well, a lot of people, a lot of even geologists don't realize it. We are very significant producers of critical minerals because of the Red Dog and Greens Creek mines. Zinc is a critical mineral. And let me put it this way. There's 1,000 zinc mines in the world right now. And 2 mines in Alaska produce 4% of the world's zinc. Now that's very significant. And at Red Dog, they're pulling out byproducts of gallium and germanium and indium, which are not very much. I mean, you measure it in a few tons and this and that, but it's used in electronic circuitry and computers, and you have it, and in classified military applications, frankly. And so that's what's going on right now. There's a rare earth element deposit near Bocan Mountain or Ketchikan. There's been an assessment of it. It's not clear it will be mine or not. But maybe the most significant thing after that is this graphite deposit north of Nome. And graphite is going to become very important in the future for used in all manner of computer technologies. And that is the largest graphite in the United States, largest deposit in the United States. It's just a matter of getting through the trials, the economic limitations of being on a remote site and getting it to a facility where it can be shipped to market. And then after that, they're looking for tin resources and other rare earth element. There's belts of rocks that have those commodities, but a long way from a resource estimate. So I'm just trying to think if I've missed anything. But that's where we're sitting right now in terms of critical. Historically, Alaska produced a lot of antimony by a guy by Earl Pilgrim and some other people, and Kantishna. It produced a lot of chromium, almost all on the Kenai Peninsula. Produced a lot of tin, mostly on the Seward Peninsula, and tungsten right here in town. And the largest single producer of tungsten was from the Fairbanks district. So those are all critical minerals. So that's, I guess.
Tom, how's it going? Do you know anything about what's going on at Good, Tower Hills?
No, I don't. I mean, it's been it's a development project, and there's a large resource there, but there's economic aspects and everything, and you'd have to, I wouldn't want to say actually. It's just there.
We'll take 2 more questions.
Yeah.
I see one back there.
I just wondered why you think copper should be a critical mineral.
Well,
Why is copper a critical
Well,
mineral?
that's really controversial in Alaska right now because there are some large copper deposits and they'd like to see it critical. And copper is a very valuable metal, but the U.S. Geological Survey has judged from a lot of different ways of looking at it that it doesn't qualify as critical at this time. If we're all driving electric cars, there's going to be a lot of copper in those electric cars. There's no question about that. But there's different ways you evaluate what is critical and what is not critical. There's an awful lot of copper being mined in the United States, and it's pretty easy to get a hold of worldwide.
All right.
Yeah.
Final question?
Yeah, well, with Siberia speaking Russian Geological Survey, I didn't know about that, and Mining Hall of Fame, researching many years ago, I found out about a miner who found a Russian fort. We may have talked about this, but I forget what we said some time ago. Louder?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I found out about a Russian fort, and I showed, and I located the site. And I showed the picture to Dr. Lydia Black. She said, this Russian-American historian, she said that's a Russian fort. And I knew Dick Pierce fairly well. And he told me the story. Dr. Pierce translated about 20 books with his own press from Russian and English. And he said, that sounds like the Lost Colony. That's the Lost Colony. Midas Bering, 1741, Lost Colony. me was 100 years before, 7 small ships had left Russia down the Amur, I suppose, Siberia. 5 of them never went back. They made a post, and Pierce, in reading the Russian documents, said the Russians looked for the survivors that stayed, looked for the descendants until about 1800 and gave it up. And it's a lost colony. Now, I think the Russians have been looking for it. Does that ring a bell?
No, I don't. There is some, they think the Russians, Vitus Bering is credited in 1741 for the discovery of Alaska. Actually, Chirikov really was the guy that probably landed first, and then he died in the Komandorsky Islands going back. But there is some thought that the Russians might have got to the Seward Peninsula as early as 1730. And there is some discussion on that and a couple of papers on it, but that's all I know.
Well,
Yeah. But they don't, that's not, they only think. They don't have proof of that. So nothing's really changed. Vitus Bering and Alexei Chirikov were the guys, the famous, they're floating around in fog, and suddenly the fog lifts and there's Mount St. Elias right in front of them. It's kind of a neat story, actually. This huge mountain right in front of them, and that was the discovery of Alaska. Pretty neat story when you think about it. Yeah.
well, you'll have an opportunity to ask more questions. We have refreshments out there, and I want to thank you, and I want to thank our guest, Tom Buntzen.
Okay.